Kate Carter had learned to measure her days in small, careful motions. The quiet efficiency of her life, early shifts at the hospital, the rhythm of school drop-offs, the steady habit of making do, kept everything from tipping over. On that gray afternoon in Cleveland, the supermarket run felt like one more ordinary task to cross off before dinner. Daniel pulled into the parking lot and cut the engine with a sharp exhale. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "I'm not going in. I don't want to walk around comparing prices." He reached into his wallet and passed her his bank card, already irritated, as if the errand itself had offended him. "Just get what you need." Kate nodded, unbuckled their son from his car seat, and took the card. She was used to Daniel's impatience. Lucas clutched her hand as they walked toward the sliding doors, his small steps quick and trusting. Inside, the store hummed with carts and conversations, fluorescent lights flattening everything into a pale sameness. Kate chose carefully: milk, bread, eggs, a few vegetables. Lucas pointed at bright packages and asked for sweets she promised for another time. She kept her voice light and her basket modest. At the checkout, she unloaded the items and waited while the cashier scanned them. When it was time to pay, Kate slid the card across the counter without a second thought. The terminal beeped, paused, and then flashed a message. The cashier tried again. The same sound, the same pause. "I'm sorry," the cashier said, not unkindly. "Insufficient funds." Heat crept up Kate's neck. She glanced behind her at the line that had formed, felt the weight of other people's impatience. "Could you try without the juice?" she asked quietly. The cashier removed it and tried again. The terminal refused. Kate swallowed and nodded, setting aside a few more items. The third attempt finally went through, approving a total that barely covered the basics. She gathered the bags with a careful steadiness, thanked the cashier, and moved away from the counter. Lucas looked up at her, confused but silent. Near the exit, Kate checked the receipt. The number was smaller than she expected. Too small. Daniel had mentioned a successful deal just the night before, a contract that would ease things for a while. She had believed him because believing was easier than questioning. Still, the unease settled in her chest, a dull pressure she couldn't name. Outside, she led Lucas to the ATM by the entrance. She inserted the card, shielding the keypad out of habit. The screen refreshed, and the balance appeared. Kate stared at it, her mind refusing to reconcile what she saw with what she had been told. The account was nearly empty. Not low, empty. She stood there longer than necessary, the machine's quiet hum filling the space around her. There was no obvious explanation, no harmless oversight that made sense. She canceled the transaction, slipped the card back into her wallet, and took Lucas's hand. Daniel was waiting in the car, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "What took so long?" he asked, already annoyed. "The line," Kate said. It was the first explanation that came to her, and it passed easily between them. He didn't press. He took the bags, loaded them into the trunk, and drove off, merging into traffic with practiced confidence. At home, Kate put the groceries away, moving through the kitchen as she always did. She fixed dinner, helped Lucas wash his hands, listened to Daniel talk about work in a tone that suggested nothing was wrong. She responded where needed, nodded where expected, kept her voice even. That night, after Lucas was asleep and the house had settled into its familiar quiet, Kate stood alone at the sink. The reflection in the window looked tired but composed. She told herself there had to be a reasonable explanation. She told herself tomorrow would bring clarity. For now, she chose not to ask questions she wasn't ready to hear answered. She dried her hands, turned off the light, and went to bed, holding tight to the fragile comfort of normalcy. That evening, after Lucas had been settled with his toys in the living room and the television murmured softly in the background, Kate moved through the apartment with practiced quiet. Daniel had gone to shower, the bathroom fan humming steadily. The ordinary sounds of the house should have been comforting. Instead, they pressed on her nerves, reminding her how fragile that sense of routine had become. Kate picked up her phone and opened the bank app. She told herself she was only checking to be sure the earlier problem had been a temporary glitch. Her fingers moved automatically, entering the login details she knew by heart. The account loaded. The balance was still painfully low. She scrolled. A single transaction stood out immediately, larger than the rest. Recent enough that it might as well have been glowing on the screen. 2 airline tickets. A coastal destination. The date was set for the following week. Kate's breath caught as she tapped into the details, hoping, irrationally, that she had misread something. The passenger name was there in plain text. Alyssa Monroe. Kate stared at the name until the letters blurred. She had never heard it before, yet it landed with the certainty of something irrevocable. 2 tickets. Not one. A planned trip. Not an emergency, not a mistake. A decision made deliberately, with money that had been quietly drained from their shared life. The bathroom door opened, and Kate locked her phone on instinct, setting it face down on the counter. Daniel emerged, relaxed, drying his hair with a towel. He moved easily, as if nothing in the world demanded explanation. Dinner passed in fragments. Daniel talked about work in vague terms, about deadlines and meetings that sounded important without saying very much at all. Halfway through the meal, he mentioned an upcoming business trip. Just a week? Maybe a little more. Something about investors, about the heat, about how exhausting it would be. Kate nodded and kept her eyes on Lucas, helping him with his food. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the name she had read, the confirmation she hadn't been looking for but could no longer ignore. Daniel's voice drifted over her, familiar and suddenly distant, like something she was hearing through water. After dinner, Daniel took call and stepped into the hallway. When he came back, he left his phone on the kitchen counter and headed to the bedroom to change. Kate noticed it immediately. The phone lay there, screen dark, innocent in appearance. For a moment, she simply stood and watched it, her pulse loud in her ears. She told herself she didn't want to know. She told herself that opening it would change everything. Then she thought of the transaction, of the name, of the weeks that suddenly made sense in a way she didn't want to accept. Kate picked up the phone. The screen unlocked easily. She had never needed to sneak before. Photos came first. She didn't scroll far. There were images of Daniel with a woman she didn't recognize, blonde, confident, her smile effortless in a way that suggested familiarity. They stood close together, closer than colleagues, closer than friends. The next folder held travel confirmations. The same destination, the same dates, 2 tickets. There was no dramatic message to read, no explicit confession written out. There didn't need to be. The evidence spoke quietly and completely. Kate set the phone down exactly where she had found it. Her hands were trembling now, but she forced them still. In the living room, Lucas laughed at something on the screen, his small joy cutting through the silence like a reminder of what mattered most. Daniel returned, already talking, already asking if Lucas was ready for bed. Kate responded when necessary, her voice steady through sheer effort. She bathed their son, read to him, tucked him in. Each step followed the next, familiar and mechanical. When Lucas finally drifted off, Kate sat on the edge of the bed beside him for a long moment, watching his chest rise and fall. Only then did she allow herself to feel the weight of what she had learned. It pressed down on her, heavy and numbing. She turned off the light, closed the door softly, and moved through the rest of the night on autopilot. For Lucas, she held herself together. For everything else, she would have to wait until morning. The next morning unfolded with a brittle calm. Kate moved through her routine as if it belonged to someone else, packing Lucas's lunch, checking the time, answering Daniel's casual questions with brief, careful replies. When the door finally closed behind him, the The silence left room for thoughts she had been holding back. She waited until Lucas was settled at preschool before sending a message she had already drafted twice and erased. "Can you meet me for lunch?" Karen Doyle replied almost immediately. "Yeah, I can get away." They chose a small diner near Daniel's office, a place Karen knew well. By the time Kate arrived, Karen was already there, a cup of coffee cooling between her hands. She looked tired, her posture guarded, as if she sensed what was coming. They exchanged a few neutral words. Work, the weather, how fast children grew. Kate listened, nodding where expected, until the space between them felt too heavy to fill with anything ordinary. She set her fork down and looked directly at Karen. "I need to ask you something," Kate said. Her voice was steady, though it cost her effort. "And I need you to be honest." Karen's eyes flickered away. She reached for her coffee, took a sip, then set it back without drinking much. "Okay," she said slowly. "Is there someone else?" Kate asked. She didn't say Daniel's name. She didn't have to. Karen exhaled, the sound long and uneven. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded once. "Kate, I didn't know how to tell you." The words landed with a dull finality. Kate felt something inside her settle, not shatter, settle, as if the uncertainty had been the sharpest pain of all. "How long?" she asked. Karen winced. "A while. Months." The diner's noise faded to a low hum. Kate focused on Karen's face, on the careful way she chose her words. "Who is she?" "Alyssa Monroe," Karen said. "She started at the office earlier this year. Confident, put together. Everyone noticed her right away." She hesitated again, then added, "Daniel did more than notice." Kate had expected the name. Hearing it spoken aloud still tightened her chest. They worked together. "At first," Karen said. "Then it became obvious. Late meetings, leaving together. No one said anything. But no one was surprised either." Kate stared at the tabletop, tracing a faint scratch with her fingertip. "Everyone knew," she said quietly. Karen nodded. "Yeah, everyone knew." The betrayal took on a new shape, then broader and heavier. It wasn't just Daniel's lies. It was the months of casual conversations, the polite smiles, the people who had looked Kate in the eye knowing what she didn't. She had been the last to understand her own life. "Why didn't you tell me?" Kate asked. The question wasn't sharp. It was tired. Karen's shoulders sagged. "I wanted to, more than once. But he's my boss, Kate. And things are complicated." She paused, then added, "You always talked about your family like everything was solid. I didn't want to be the one to blow that up." Kate absorbed that in silence. Solid. The word felt almost ironic now. She thought of the dinner she had made, the excuses she had accepted, the trust she had given without question. "They're close?" Kate asked. Karen nodded again. "Very. She got time off approved easily. And when Daniel mentioned a trip, people assumed," she trailed off, then met Kate's eyes. "I'm sorry." Kate believed her. The apology didn't change what had already happened, but she could hear the fear beneath it. Still, understanding didn't soften the hurt. It clarified it. They sat there for a moment, the space between them filled with everything that couldn't be undone. Kate felt the familiar urge to confront, to demand explanations, to force the truth out into the open. It rose quickly and then passed. "No," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "No what?" Karen asked. "I'm not saying anything to him. Not yet." Kate pushed her chair back, slightly, grounding herself. "I don't want excuses. I don't want stories that make me doubt what I know." Karen studied her. "Then what are you going to do?" Kate shook her head. "I don't know. But I want the truth. The whole thing. And I won't get that if I confront him now." She stood, leaving some cash on the table. Karen rose with her, looking uncertain, as if she wanted to say more and didn't know how. Kate offered a small, restrained nod. Outside, the air felt sharper, clearer. Kate walked to her car with a steadiness she hadn't felt in days. Everyone had known. That truth hurt, but it also stripped away the last of her hesitation. She started the engine and drove, already preparing herself for what would come next. Daniel chose his moment carefully. He brought it up over dinner, his tone casual, as if the words carried no weight at all. He mentioned a business trip. About a week, maybe a little longer if meetings ran late. Investors. Negotiations. The kind of explanation that sounded reasonable without saying very much. Kate listened from across the table, her expression composed. She nodded at the right places, asked a neutral question or two, and kept her attention mostly on Lucas. Daniel spoke easily, smoothly as though rehearsed. There was no hesitation in him, no trace of guilt that Kate could see. The lie sat comfortably in his mouth. Later that evening, when Lucas climbed onto Daniel's lap with a book, Daniel leaned into the role of an attentive father. He talked about what they would do when he got back, maybe a short trip somewhere close, maybe the zoo, maybe finally seeing the waterfalls Lucas had been asking about. Lucas listened wide-eyed, soaking in every word. Kate watched from the doorway, her hands wrapped around a mug she had already forgotten to drink from. Each promise landed like a small cut. Daniel wasn't just lying to her. He was weaving the lie into their child's future, making it sound warm and safe. She said nothing. The next day confirmed what Kate already knew. Karen sent a brief message. Alyssa had taken time off work. Same dates. Same week. Kate read it once and deleted it. There was no need to hold on to proof she already carried inside her. Daniel packed lightly but deliberately, choosing clothes for different weather, explaining that business trips were unpredictable. He kissed Kate's cheek before leaving, the gesture familiar enough to almost feel normal. Almost. "Call me if you need anything," he said, lifting his bag. "I will," Kate replied. Her voice didn't betray her. When the door closed behind him, the apartment felt suddenly larger and emptier. Kate stood still for a moment, letting the quiet settle. Then she moved. She called the hospital and requested time off. The explanation came easily. She was exhausted, needed a few days. It wasn't a lie. She arranged her schedule quickly, efficiently, the way she did everything else. Next, she called Daniel's mother. Margaret Carter agreed without hesitation to take Lucas for a few days. She sounded almost pleased by the request, remarking that a little time with his grandmother would do him good. Kate kept the conversation brief. She didn't trust herself to say more. When Kate dropped Lucas off later that afternoon, she hugged him longer than usual. He protested mildly, then ran inside, already distracted by familiar toys. Margaret stood in the doorway, watching Kate with a measuring look that made her shoulders tighten. "You're working too much," Margaret said, not unkindly but firmly. Kate nodded. It was easier than explaining. She kissed Lucas again, promised to see him soon, and walked back to her car without looking back. At home, she packed a small bag. Only the essentials. She checked her phone, reread the flight details she had memorized the night before, and booked her own ticket. It felt strange to make plans in such quiet, deliberate steps, as if she were arranging someone else's life. The decision had been made the moment she chose not to confront Daniel. Words would give him room to maneuver, to deny, to twist the truth. Kate didn't want explanations crafted to protect him. She wanted reality, stripped of excuses. That evening, she sat alone at the kitchen table, the light overhead casting soft shadows on the walls. She imagined Daniel at the airport, unburdened, confident in the story he had told. She imagined Alyssa waiting somewhere warm and bright, unaware or uninterested in the damage left behind. Kate didn't allow herself to imagine what she would do when she saw them. That wasn't the point. The point was clarity. To look directly at what Daniel had chosen and understand it fully, without filters or second-hand accounts. She locked the door, turned off the lights, and lay down without sleeping much. By morning, she would be on her way. She didn't feel brave. She felt resolved. For the first time since the card had declined, Kate wasn't reacting. She was moving forward, quietly, deliberately, toward the truth she needed to see with her own eyes. Kate arrived at the seaside town late in the afternoon, the air warmer than Cleveland and heavy with salt. The drive from the airport felt unreal, like a transition between two versions of her life. Palm-lined streets gave way to a white hotel set back from the road, balconies facing the water, the sound of waves muted but constant. It was the kind of place meant for rest, for forgetting obligations. Kate felt none of that. Her chest was tight, her steps deliberate. Inside, the lobby was bright and quiet. A few guests sat near the windows with drinks, laughter low and unhurried. Kate approached the front desk with a practiced calm she did not feel. The clerk looked up, polite and distracted. "I'm here to drop off medication for a guest," Kate said, lowering her voice slightly, as if sharing something routine. "She's not feeling well after the flight. Alyssa Monroe." The clerk checked the screen. "Does she know you're coming?" "Yes," Kate replied without hesitation. "She asked me to bring it up so she wouldn't have to come down." The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'll let you up." Kate thanked her, taking the key card when it was offered. The elevator ride felt longer than it was. She watched the numbers light up, counting them without meaning to. When the doors opened, the hallway was quiet, carpeted, the distant sound of the ocean barely audible through the walls. She stopped in front of the room and stood there for a moment, hand hovering near the door. This was it, the moment she had traveled for. She knocked. The door opened slowly. A woman stood there, barefoot, wrapped in a light robe. Blonde hair fell loose around her shoulders. Alyssa Monroe looked at Kate with mild surprise that faded quickly into annoyance. "Yes?" Alyssa asked. Kate didn't soften her voice. "Where's Daniel?" Alyssa's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Who?" "My husband," Kate said. "Daniel Carter." Recognition flickered across Alyssa's face, followed by something closer to indifference. "He's not here." Kate stepped past her before she could object, scanning the room. The bed was neatly made. One suitcase lay open on the floor, its contents clearly belonging to a woman. There were no men's shoes by the door, no jacket draped over a chair, no sign that Daniel had ever crossed the threshold. "What are you doing?" Alyssa snapped. "You can't just walk in here." "Where is he?" Kate repeated, slower this time. Alyssa crossed her arms. "I don't know what he told you, but I'm here alone." Kate moved through the room methodically, opening the bathroom door, checking the balcony. It was empty. The ocean stretched out beyond it, calm and indifferent. She returned to the center of the room, her confusion growing heavier by the second. "You're lying," Kate said, though the room told her otherwise. Alyssa laughed softly. "About what?" "That he didn't show up." She shrugged. "Plans change." Kate turned to face her fully. "You knew he was married." Alyssa didn't deny it. "Yes." "And you don't care." Alyssa's expression hardened. "Why should I? I didn't promise you anything." "He did." She gestured toward the door. "I came here to relax. Whatever mess he left behind isn't my problem." The bluntness of it stole Kate's anger before it could rise. She had expected defiance, maybe shame. What she found was emptiness. Alyssa wasn't hiding anything. She simply didn't feel responsible. Kate searched once more, slower now, her eyes catching on details she hadn't noticed before. Only one toothbrush, one side of the closet untouched. The room had been booked for two, but occupied by one. Daniel had paid for the trip and vanished. Kate stepped back, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt standing there. "He never came," she said, more to herself than to Alyssa. Alyssa tilted her head. Looks that way. Kate nodded once and walked to the door. Alyssa watched her go without offering another word. In the hallway, Kate leaned briefly against the wall, steadying herself. The anger she had carried all this way dissolved into something colder and more unsettling. If Daniel wasn't here, then where was he? She returned the key card at the front desk without comment and stepped outside. The sun was lowering over the water, casting the hotel in warm light that felt undeserved. Kate stood still for a moment, listening to the waves, trying to reorder her thoughts. She had followed the lie to its end, and found a gap where Daniel should have been. Whatever he had planned, it hadn't included Alyssa, and it certainly hadn't included coming back. As Kate walked away from the hotel, confusion replaced certainty. The truth she had come to see was only partial, and the question left behind was far more dangerous than betrayal alone. Kate called Daniel from the sidewalk outside the hotel, then again from the car, and once more before she reached the highway. Each time, the call rang until it dropped into silence. She tried a text, then another. No response. By the time she reached the airport, his phone went straight to voicemail. On the flight back to Cleveland, she watched the screen above the aisle track their slow progress east. She told herself there had to be a simple explanation. Bad reception, a drained battery, a missed connection. Yet the hours passed without a single notification. The absence settled into her, like a weight. When she landed, she tried again. The message this time was different. The line was unreachable. At home, the apartment felt colder than she remembered. Kate set her bag down and stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter where Daniel's phone usually lay. She called Karen. No answer. She called Margaret, forcing her voice steady. Daniel's mother hadn't heard from him either. The reassurance Kate expected didn't come. Margaret sounded irritated more than worried, dismissing the concern with a suggestion that Daniel was busy and would call when he felt like it. Kate didn't sleep. She paced, checked the time, refreshed her messages. By morning, the unease had sharpened into something closer to panic. She went to Daniel's office after dropping Lucas off. The building looked the same from the outside, but inside it felt wrong immediately. Faces she didn't recognize moved through the space with purpose. A temporary sign had been taped near the reception desk. The company name, followed by a new logo. Kate stopped a passing employee. "I'm looking for Daniel Carter." The man frowned slightly. "He's not here." "When will he be back?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't think he is." Kate felt the floor tilt beneath her. She asked for an explanation and was told, politely and vaguely, that management had changed. Questions were redirected. Names were offered that meant nothing to her. No one seemed surprised by Daniel's absence. She left the building with her heart pounding, dialing Daniel again, even though she knew the result. Unreachable. By noon, Kate was sitting in a plastic chair at the police station, hands folded tightly in her lap. She explained that her husband hadn't returned from a supposed business trip, that his phone was dead, that his company appeared to be under new control. The officer listened, nodding, typing notes with unhurried precision. "Has he contacted you at all?" the officer asked. "No." "Any history of him leaving without notice?" "No." "Any threats?" "Enemies." Kate shook her head. She felt foolish listing reasons he might be in danger when only days earlier she had been preparing to confront him for betrayal. The officer leaned back. "Based on what you're telling me, there's no immediate evidence of foul play. Adults are allowed to leave voluntarily." Kate's throat tightened. "He has a child." "That doesn't change the procedure," the officer said gently. "If he's been missing for 72 hours and there's still no contact, you can come back. For now, this sounds like a domestic situation." Domestic. The word felt dismissive, as if the fear crowding her chest were an inconvenience rather than a warning. She left the station in a daze, the city moving around her at its usual pace. Cars honked. People laughed. Life continued, indifferent to the fact that Daniel Carter had seemingly vanished. At home, Kate sat on the couch and stared at the wall. Anger flared first, hot and familiar. He had done this. He had chosen to disappear, to leave her cleaning up the wreckage of his lies. Then guilt followed, quieter but more corrosive. She had followed him. She had waited. She hadn't confronted him when she had the chance. What if something had happened to him? The thought cut through everything else. Kate imagined scenarios she couldn't stop. An accident, a confrontation gone wrong, a decision he hadn't planned to survive. Each possibility twisted the fear tighter. The betrayal receded, replaced by something more primal and frightening. She called Karen again. This time Karen answered. Her voice dropped immediately when Kate explained. People at the office are talking, Karen said. They don't know where he is either. And there are rumors. About a sale. About paperwork being finalized weeks ago. Why wouldn't he tell me? Kate asked. I don't know, Karen said. But it doesn't feel right. Kate hung up and sat in the silence that followed. For the first time since she had seen the transaction. Since she had learned the truth about Alyssa. Kate wasn't thinking about infidelity. She was thinking about whether Daniel was alive, whether she would ever hear his voice again. Fear eclipsed everything else. And in that fear, Kate realized how completely her life had been pulled off course by a man who had not only lied, but now seemed to have erased himself entirely. Kate returned to the office the following morning with a resolve she hadn't felt the day before. Fear had sharpened into focus. If Daniel had vanished, the answers were here or nowhere at all. She asked for the new owner by name and was led down a corridor that smelled faintly of fresh paint and unfamiliar cologne. The office at the end of the hall was neat, impersonal, its shelves still half empty. A man stood as she entered, extending his hand. David Reynolds, he said. Please have a seat. Kate didn't take his hand. She remained standing, her posture stiff. My husband founded this company. His name is Daniel Carter. He's missing. I need to know what's going on. David's expression shifted, not to alarm, but to something closer to understanding. He gestured to the chair again. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but Daniel isn't missing. Kate felt her breath hitch. What do you mean? He sold the company, David said evenly. To me. Weeks ago. The words landed with a dull thud. Kate lowered herself into the chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. That's not possible. David opened a folder on his desk and slid it across to her. Inside were copies, contracts, signatures, dates. Everything was clean, precise, unmistakably legal. He initiated the sale, David continued. We negotiated terms, finalized the transfer, and completed payment. The funds cleared in full. Kate scanned the pages without truly reading them. When did you last speak to him? She asked. 2 days ago, David replied. He called to clarify a minor detail. He was calm, confident, in good spirits. Alive. The word echoed in her head even though David hadn't said it outright. Alive meant something else entirely now. He planned this, Kate said, her voice flat. David didn't contradict her. It appears so. The pieces rearranged themselves with brutal clarity. The emptied account, the tickets, the absence at the hotel. Daniel hadn't gone missing. He had stepped aside, leaving space behind him where a life used to be. He let people think something happened to him, Kate said. He let them look at Alyssa. David frowned slightly. There were questions. She was interviewed. She seemed genuinely confused. Kate nodded once. Alyssa's indifference took on a new meaning. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been used. Why didn't he tell me? Kate asked, though she already knew the answer forming in her chest. David hesitated. I can't speak to his reasons, but the sale was intentional, thorough. He wanted a clean break. A clean break. From the company. From responsibility. From her. Kate pushed the folder back across the desk. So he took the money and left. Yes. And you're certain he's fine? As far as I can tell, David said. There was nothing to suggest otherwise. Kate stood. The room felt suddenly too small. Thank you, she said, the words hollow but necessary. David rose as well. If you need confirmation for the police, I can provide documentation. Statements. Anything to clarify that he's not missing. She met his eyes then, searching for something. Sympathy, perhaps, or judgment. She found neither. Only a quiet acknowledgement of what had been done. In the hallway, Karen stood waiting, her face tight with curiosity and concern. Kate didn't stop. She walked past her, through the lobby, out into the daylight. Outside, Cleveland moved as it always did. Buses hissed to a stop. People crossed the street with coffee cups in hand. The city didn't mark the moment when a marriage ended, not with a sound, not with a sign. Daniel had orchestrated everything. He had sold the business, drained the account, booked the tickets, and vanished by design. He had left behind confusion and suspicion, allowed Alyssa to absorb the blame, and erased Kate from the narrative entirely. She wasn't collateral damage. She was something he had deliberately cut away. Kate reached her car and sat behind the wheel without starting it. The fear that had consumed her the day before receded, replaced by a cold, steady understanding. Daniel wasn't in danger. He wasn't lost. He had chosen a life that didn't include her or their son. The truth was no longer hidden. It was stark and unforgiving, and now that she saw it clearly, Kate knew there would be no going back. The call came 2 days later in the early afternoon, while Kate was folding laundry at the kitchen table. The number was unfamiliar. She almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was another wrong number or a reminder she didn't have the energy to hear. At the last second, she answered. "Kate Carter?" the man asked. His voice was calm, professional. "Yes. My name is Martin Hale. I'm an attorney representing Margaret Carter." Kate's hands went still. "My mother-in-law?" "Yes. I'm calling to inform you that she has filed a petition for custody of your son, Lucas." The words didn't register all at once. Custody. Petition. Her son's name spoken by a stranger as if it were a formality. On what grounds? Kate asked, her voice steady by habit alone. "Mrs. Carter believes it is in the child's best interest to reside with her at this time," the attorney replied. "She claims you are financially unstable, frequently absent due to work, and emotionally compromised by recent events." Kate closed her eyes. The kitchen felt suddenly too bright. "That's not true." "You'll have the opportunity to respond," he said. "A hearing will be scheduled. You should consider obtaining counsel." When the call ended, Kate remained seated, the phone still pressed to her ear. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Her thoughts moved slowly, as if wading through something thick and resistant. This wasn't concern. It was an attack. She drove to Margaret's apartment without calling first. Margaret opened the door with a look that was almost triumphant, though she quickly masked it with a practiced expression of worry. "I was wondering when you'd come," Margaret said. Kate didn't step inside. "You're trying to take my child." "I'm trying to protect my grandson," Margaret replied. "Daniel is gone. Someone has to think about Lucas's future." Kate laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You mean now? Not when his father was lying to us. Not when he disappeared." Margaret's mouth tightened. "You're emotional. That's exactly my point." The conversation went nowhere. Margaret spoke of stability, of her larger apartment, of savings and time and experience. She spoke as if Lucas were an object to be relocated, not a child who cried for his mother at night. Kate left before she said something she couldn't take back. The lawyer called again the next morning with details, documents, deadlines, words that sounded neutral but felt anything but. By afternoon, Karen called. I need to tell you something, Karen said, her voice strained. Kate braced herself. What is it? Margaret asked me to be a witness. Kate felt the air leave her lungs, and I said yes. There it was, the final confirmation of what Kate had already sensed. What are you going to say? She asked. Karen hesitated. That you're always working. That Daniel handled most of the day-to-day stuff with Lucas. That you're tired, overwhelmed. Kate closed her eyes. Each word landed exactly where Margaret had aimed it. That's not the truth, she said. I know, Karen whispered. But they asked me to speak to what I've seen. And this is what they want. Kate didn't argue. She didn't beg. She thanked Karen and ended the call, setting the phone down carefully as if it might shatter. By evening, the shape of the situation was clear. Margaret had money, time, and legal representation. She had framed Kate as unstable and inadequate at the precise moment Kate was least able to defend herself. Karen's testimony would give the narrative credibility. Daniel's absence would be used as evidence of Kate's failure rather than his. Kate sat on the floor of Lucas's room, surrounded by toys he hadn't touched in days. She pressed her forehead against the edge of the bed and breathed through the tightness in her chest. Everything she had endured, the betrayal, the disappearance, the humiliation, had been survivable. This was different. This was her child. She was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Her bank account was thin. Hiring a lawyer felt impossible. The thought of standing in a courtroom while strangers evaluated her worth as a mother made her hands shake. And yet, beneath the exhaustion and fear, something steadied. Margaret's move had clarified the battlefield. This wasn't about concern or love. It was control. And Kate understood, with a sudden, painful clarity, that she was being pushed to the edge deliberately. She stood and looked around the room, memorizing the small details, the scattered books, the dinosaur on the pillow, the faint smell of her son's shampoo. Whatever else happened, she would not step aside quietly. They had coordinated their attack. And now, Kate would have to find a way to survive it. David Reynolds didn't call Kate immediately after their last conversation. When he did, his voice was measured, deliberate, as if every word had already been weighed. I think I know how to get him to surface, he said, but it has to be done carefully. Kate sat at the kitchen table, the custody paperwork spread out in front of her like a threat. How? She asked. Daniel didn't disappear because he wanted to be forgotten, David said. He disappeared because he wanted control, and because he believes he's untouchable. He paused. People like that don't ignore money. David explained the plan in simple terms. A former client, fictional but convincing, would be mentioned through the right channels. A high-value opportunity. Enough profit to make Daniel believe he was missing out. David would let it be known, casually, that the deal had come together after the sale of the company and that there were funds to be distributed. Nothing formal. Just a suggestion that if Daniel wanted his share of the credit, he should come talk. Kate listened without interrupting. The idea felt surreal, almost reckless, but she recognized the logic immediately. Daniel had sold his life for money and freedom. He wouldn't resist the chance to take more. Will it work? She asked. David didn't hesitate. Yes. He coordinated quietly. He contacted the detective who had taken Kate's initial report and explained the situation. Documentation was prepared. If Daniel appeared, he would be questioned, not arrested, not ambushed, but confronted with the consequences of his choices. 2 days later, the call came. Daniel had reached out. He agreed to meet David at a downtown office, confident and relaxed, according to the message he left. He sounded like a man who believed he was stepping into an advantage. David informed the police. Kate was not there when Daniel arrived. She didn't want to see him yet. She didn't trust herself to remain silent. Daniel walked into the building as if nothing had happened. He smiled, shook hands, made small talk. When the detectives entered the room, his expression changed, but only briefly. He recovered quickly, the same way he always had. The questions began calmly. Where had he been? Why had he allowed his family to believe he was missing? Why had his disappearance caused an investigation? Daniel tried to explain it away at first. A misunderstanding, a desire for space, a clean break. He spoke as if the damage were incidental, unavoidable. But the details didn't hold. The sale of the company, the drained accounts, the tickets, the deliberate silence. When pressed, Daniel stopped pretending. He admitted to orchestrating his disappearance, to selling the business quietly, to letting suspicion fall where it might. He dismissed Alyssa's involvement with a shrug, minimizing her role as if she were an inconvenience rather than a person. The statements were recorded. The explanation was complete. There was no crime in leaving, no law against abandoning responsibility, but there was no mystery left to exploit either. That afternoon, Kate sat in the courtroom with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Margaret Carter sat across the aisle, composed, confident, her attorney beside her. Karen sat behind them, eyes fixed on the floor. The hearing began as expected. Margaret's lawyer outlined the argument with practiced ease, financial instability, emotional distress, inconsistent presence. Karen was called to testify. She repeated what she had agreed to say, her voice hesitant, her words less certain than before. Then it was Kate's turn. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady but her voice clear. "Your Honor," she said, "I need to inform the court of a significant development." The judge looked up. "Go on." "My husband, Daniel Carter, has been located," Kate said. "He is currently giving statements to law enforcement regarding his disappearance, the sale of his company, and the actions that led to these proceedings." A ripple moved through the room. Margaret turned sharply, her composure cracking for the first time. "That's not true," she said. Too quickly. Kate didn't look at her. "The court can verify this information," she continued. "Documentation is available." The judge called for a recess. Phones were checked. Names were confirmed. When the session resumed, the atmosphere had shifted. Margaret's attorney whispered urgently to her, his earlier confidence gone, given the new information. The judge announced the custody hearing would be postponed. Further evaluation would be required. Testimony based on incomplete or misleading circumstances could not be considered reliable. Karen stared at her hands. Margaret sat rigid, her strategy collapsing in real time. Kate returned to her seat and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The danger wasn't over, but it had been halted. For now, Daniel had finally surfaced. And with his reappearance, the narrative he and his mother had tried to construct fell apart, exposed, unsustainable, and no longer in their control. The court's decision arrived quietly, without drama or ceremony. Margaret Carter's petition for custody was denied. The ruling cited insufficient grounds and noted the misleading context under which the case had been initiated. Kate listened as the words were read, her hands folded, her back straight. When it was over, she didn't cry. Relief came later, in smaller moments. When she picked Lucas up herself, when she tucked him into his own bed, when she realized no one could take him from her now. Daniel did not attend the final hearing. Through his attorney, he agreed to proceed with a divorce. Kate signed the papers without hesitation. There were no negotiations worth fighting over, no property to divide that hadn't already been stripped away. The marriage ended the way it had functioned for a long time, unevenly, without warmth, without regret on his side. Kate felt only clarity. Life did not slow down after that. If anything, it demanded more from her. She returned to full shifts at the hospital, adjusted to single parenting, learned to stretch time and money further than before. Some days were manageable, others were not, but there was a steadiness beneath it all that hadn't existed before, the absence of waiting for someone who would never show up. It was during a routine appointment at a women's clinic that the nurse paused, checked the results again, and smiled gently. Kate sat very still as the words reached her. She was pregnant. The news followed her home like an echo. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Kate sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. She counted and recounted possibilities. Fear came first, then practicality, then a quieter, deeper resolve. She did not call Daniel. The decision to keep the child formed without debate. It wasn't driven by optimism or hope that things would be easier. It came from the same place that had carried her through everything else, a refusal to abandon what mattered simply because it was hard. David Reynolds checked in often during those months. At first it was practical. Updates, confirmations, brief conversations about loose ends tied to Daniel's case. Over time, it became something else. He listened without trying to fix. He offered support without conditions. He accepted the reality of Kate's life without asking her to simplify it for his comfort. When Kate finally told him about the pregnancy, she did so plainly without apology. She expected distance. What she received was calm understanding. "I know," David said after a moment, "and I'm not going anywhere." The months passed. Lucas adjusted to a new rhythm, one shaped by Kate's presence rather than Daniel's promises. The pregnancy progressed quietly. Kate's life narrowed to what was necessary: work, home, school, appointments. Stability took on a new meaning. It wasn't comfort. It was reliability. They married the following year, without announcements or spectacle. The ceremony was small, held in a modest restaurant with a handful of people who mattered. There were no speeches about destiny or second chances, just simple vows, spoken clearly and kept. During the reception, a familiar face appeared near the entrance. Karen Doyle stood there holding a small bouquet, uncertain. Older somehow than Kate remembered her. She waited until the room thinned before approaching. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," Karen said quietly, "for everything." Kate studied her for a long moment. She saw fear there and regret, and the exhaustion of someone who had finally reached the end of her excuses. Kate nodded. "I know," she said. Karen left soon after. A week later, Kate heard she had moved away to live with family, leaving Cleveland behind. The news carried no weight. Some chapters didn't need revisiting. Later that evening, Kate stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The air was warm, the city light soft. Through the window, she could see Lucas laughing with David, his small hands animated, his voice unburdened. Kate rested her hand against her stomach, feeling the steady presence of the life growing there. She thought of everything she had mistaken for stability before: shared accounts, rehearsed conversations, the illusion of partnership. None of it had held when tested. This did. Not perfection, not promises, just a life that showed up every day. Kate stood there a little longer, then went back inside, where her children were waiting